This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, we begin Marty's series on Hosea with the help of Elle Grover Fricks, considering a framework we can use to approach a passage with a fresh lens.
Well, we're in session 9. We've got a new rhythm. We've got a new groove. We've kind of figured ourselves out for now. We got these co-hosts. We've all got a little series.
And I've got a sore throat, so I might not even say much.
Brent's just going to be quiet today. Elle and I will have plenty to talk about. Mm-hmm. We all just kind of sit down every season and ask ourselves together as a team, what are the things that are kind of on the front burners of our, whether it's our research or things we're working on or things that just won't leave us alone, and what do we want to do a series about? I still had, what was it, 2 years ago? 2 sessions ago, at least. I was doing a bunch of work in my own library through the prophets. And I had 2 prophets that rose to the surface and just, I don't know, I think I'm always prayerfully, when I'm doing that kind of research, I'm just prayerfully listening for, this one doesn't hit me, that one doesn't hit me, but this one seems to kind of come together for whatever reason, whether it's the content I'm looking at or... And there were 2 prophets. One of them was Isaiah, so we did that last session. And the other one, for whatever reason, that just came together in my mind was Hosea, and so... That's the last one that I have from my last little research project. So I'm assuming that I'm going to try to point myself towards the New Testament in the future. But we shall see.
I like the idea of Hosea not leaving you alone and just heckling you as you choose to do Isaiah first.
Yeah.
It's like, great. Come on, man.
Absolutely.
We'll swap.
I tried to.
I'll do Tanakh.
There you go. I like that. It's a good plan. So anyway, that's what brings me to Hosea, is a couple years worth of notes that have been sitting there unaddressed. And so I just thought I would point myself in that direction and go with it. As far as context, I don't have a lot of context that I haven't already shared in session 2. So we should definitely put link that episode in the show notes.
Episode 49.
Episode 49. And we've chatted about we had a diagram about the historical context of prophets, where I tend to put them. I'm in a grad class right now. I'm finding out that not all teachers put them in the same places on the chart that I put them in. But I digress. In this case, the pre-Assyrian prophets, or the Assyrian prophets, or however you want to word that, our tables matched. So I feel pretty good. But we talked about the context, where it fits historically, at least as the prophet presents itself in content. So you go back and review that, but I'm really curious. I just wanted to hear from Elle. A, she may have a whole bunch of thoughts about context, but B, I was very aware. I was becoming aware even years ago when I did the first episode. Like, there are so many dangerous things that were just kind of tiptoeing around when it comes to talking about the story of Hosea, as far as the way we talk about women, sex workers, there's so many topics that are all coming together and colliding in the study of Hosea, and adultery, and just so many things. And I was like, this is probably a book that we should be more careful about before we just start slinging comments around about what it is or what it isn't. And I thought, what a great conversation to have. So I want to ask Elle, that's all the context I have. I just want to say, Elle, what are some of the things what are the things you think we should think about? What are the things that you think we should have in mind? What are the dangers? What are all the things? Give me all the things. Hosea, I'm here for it.
Excellent. I think those are really important things to have in mind. And in fact, I'm bringing a tool today that we can add to our toolbox all the time. If we want to approach a story, a passage, a book of scripture, and we want to have a fresh lens. And maybe as we grow and evolve and change, we're aware of some different things that we might not have been in the past, and we're trying to sort everything out. So I'm going to walk us through a chart that you, listener at home, driving in your car, don't make it while you're driving, but anytime you're engaging in your personal study and you start a new story or a new passage or a new scroll, what kind of things might it be helpful to think through before you start?
You would suggest this would be true for this isn't just tailored for Hosea, but anytime we're studying a prophet or any kind of.
Right. You're going to start the story of David. You do that. You're going to look at Zechariah. You're going to look at the Garden of Eden story, right? There's a myriad uses that this tool can come in handy for.
And Brent has probably got a copy, some kind of form of this in the show notes, I'm betting. Yeah. I've now committed you.
Under compulsion, but yes. Yes, it will be there.
He's been voluntold.
I love it.
Wonderful. Okay, so on this sheet of paper, if you're not looking at the show notes at this moment, you're going to have a series of columns, 6 columns, in fact. And on the far left column, because we're Westerners and we go left to right, gosh dang it. The far left column, I would recommend putting the following. What are the things that I have always heard about Hosea, or whatever text you're looking at? What's the point that you've always heard? What are the lessons, the undercurrents? What's the way you've heard it preached before? You don't need to fit all of that at the top of the column, but that general idea, things I've heard before, you could even just draw an ear. And it's helpful, at least for me, to chart that out, because you never know what kind of like voices from your past are still hovering in your brain, or it can be helpful to know and bring to mind, okay, what are the pathways that have already been trod? And it's not that those pathways are all going to be wrong and they're all bad and they should be put in the trash. That's not what I'm saying at all. But just bringing awareness, like, oh yeah, every time I've heard somebody preach on this, it's always come out to be about how, boy, women are so wily, you got to watch out. Or about how good men and good marriages save bad women, or about how Jesus pursues us even when we've gone way off the deep end. And, you know, there are different things that we can pull out from each of those approaches. We don't have to do that right now, but being aware of that and being like, oh, this is even maybe historically a way that this text gets talked about can kind of prime our pump for our critical thinking as we actually encounter the text itself.
Okay, I love column 1 because I think that already, I love this first question because that I think is what I was subconsciously aware of when I was like, wait, before I dive into this study, because I was just like, I've always just been told and assumed and presumed Hosea's told to marry a prostitute. Mm-hmm. She obviously is like super unfaithful. She always just like, she can't even stay in a marriage. She's just running after, you know, this lustful life of hers. And he's just like, oh, I'm so betrayed. And there's all these assumptions I've made because of how the story's been pitched to me. And then the story is about infidelity. It's about literal infidelity. It's about spiritual infidelity, and becomes an allegory of my walk with Jesus and God's faithfulness and my, and so, yeah, I just want to make sure I'm asking good questions about how much of that is a good assumption. Helpful to bring a neutral palate to those thoughts, and not get frustrated immediately and get off track. Okay, so that's column 1, stuff that we've heard before, stuff that we're used to hearing, and we'll come back and you can reevaluate them later. Column number 2, which is equally important in my opinion, is at the top. You can title it biases, and those are specifically your biases, my biases, whatever bias you're bringing to the text. So maybe, you know, you've grown up with that kind of storytelling about Gomer and what kind of person she is. And so maybe you've got a little rebel instinct that's like, no, I want her to actually be like great, or maybe even the hero, or maybe not have done so much wrong. And if that's the case, that's also really good to acknowledge, because if we write out all of our biases and then later we come to the text and we notice that everything we find in the text exactly matches our bias, then we might bring some curiosity to that, right? And say, interesting. Might I need to reevaluate one or the other, right? Because it's pretty unlikely that every time the text says exactly what you're hoping it'll say. And
And again, it's not that those things are bad or something that we need to scrub and get rid of and try to be just an ethereal force with no hopes or desires or ideas. But it's good to know that about yourself, because all of our theology gets processed through individual experience, right? Kant talks about that all the time. And so being aware of that individual experience and the ways that it's shaping our own lens can help us approach with even a glimmer of hope toward objectivity and critical thinking.
Okay, so I'm just journeying along with this path you're giving me, this little 6-column chart, or how many columns you said there were. I'm just going along with you here. I'm realizing when I think about my experience in pastoral ministry, how inextricably linked our own personal experiences. Like, here's a story of infidelity on some level. And we've all been connected to different stories. We've experienced it on one end, or we know people that have been a part of those kind of stories. And it's really, if we've experienced betrayal, it's going to impact the way that we read that story in a way that you can't even turn that off in some cases. But knowing that that's what we bring to those stories is super important. I'm just wrestling through, like, I have my own people in my own life, people that will go unnamed for obvious reasons. And I'm like, oh yeah, that would, yep. Okay. That, okay. Yep. I connect those things to that. As I read this story, I connect the things that I've experienced in my friends or others to this story for sure.
I say this somewhat jokingly, but I think I'm actually serious. My bias is that her name is Gomer, which even pronouncing it Gomer, I think helps a lot. But Gomer just sounds like such a goofy word. Like, oh, she's just this dumb prostitute. She doesn't like the name just sets this foundation of my understanding of her.
We've even turned the name into like a derogatory, not really necessarily a slur, but we're like, oh, what a Gomer. Like we turn her name into like this reference, right?
I think of the gopher from Winnie the Pooh, so maybe my brain with my toddler is built a little bit differently, and that's okay too.
Yes, it is.
That's the midrash, actually, is that he, has to go find a gopher. Okay. Column number 3.
I'm going to need a citation for that. Midrash, please.
Column number 3. I think it's an important practice. What goes on this column is to notice what is actually there. And then once we write down that most basic bullet point you can possibly think of, which feels so obvious it's not even worth writing down. After we think that, then we should ask ourselves, is that true? So if you're in the story of Eden, the first bullet point you can write down is there is a garden. The next thing you can ask yourself then, is that true? What is a garden? You click through on BLB, you look at the different concordance notes and the pictures that come up in Gesenius and whatever, however deep you want to go. You think about, oh, am I thinking of like the Palace of Versailles? Am I thinking about like a little English cottage garden? Google Near Eastern garden, right? You can go through as deep and as long as you want before you move on to the very next bullet point, right? Which would be there's a tree and so on. So in this story, especially with the parts that are so famous, because of course there's a lot of Hosea, which isn't about this, but the first thing that happens right off the bat in the beginning of the scroll is this story we've been talking about, right? So the first thing you might write is, well, it's about a prostitute. And then our follow-up question is it? Is it about a prostitute? And that might be questioning the word about. It might be questioning the word prostitute. But if we look a little closer, if you use all the tools that we've talked about 100 times at least on Bema, and you start looking at, okay, what does it actually say in the Hebrew? What's here? Well, you might notice the standard word, the classic word, the normal word for a prostitute or a sex worker is zona. And it almost says that, but not quite. It says eshet zunim, hard even for me to say. So it's not quite the same word. What does that mean? Why would she be called that rather than the standard word? Or sometimes we see kedashah, which means like a holy, right, set apart temple prostitute from a pagan religion. And so if you start to do research, you'll see that that root means damp, which there's places to go with that. But there's also an actual place, an actual region in Israel, relatively close to Jerusalem, called Zenoa. And it has these big damp caves in it that are dripping, and you can go in. Is it possible that when God says to go find a woman of Zenoa, perhaps Nunim, right, of these caves, perhaps that's what he's talking about? Is our whole conclusion that she's a sex worker totally off the bat, completely? Maybe. I don't have a definite answer there. It's possible. We also see the word zun means the word to feed. And so throughout Christian tradition and history, some people have taken that root and decided that it actually means like an innkeeper. And so they tell the story of Rahab, not that she's a sex worker,
right,
but that she's an innkeeper. And the Midrash does that as well, I believe.
Or combine those two ideas together, that she's an innkeeper, almost running like a brothel type. Yeah, sure. Yep.
Exactly. So that's also a possibility, that she's an innkeeper, which might feel different in some way to us. But it is also possible that she is a prostitute, right? Not trying to erase the parts of the text that are inflammatory or make some of us uncomfortable. So leave that option on the table. What does that mean? And we have an opportunity there. You can make a little word bubble in your column to be like, well, what are my assumptions about prostitutes, right? What has Hollywood told me? She's poor. She's a social outcast. She lives in the streets, right? Mm-hmm. Anne Hathaway from Les Miserables. Mm-hmm. She's really sad, pushed to the margins. And that might not be true, because not everything in Hollywood or from our era is the same. We've found what seems to be a mass grave of women along a trade route that seems to have been for sex trafficking. They were buried when they died along the way in this mass grave in the Negev, and we'll link that in the show notes. But these women were buried with lots of valuables. They're buried with necklaces and bracelets and jewelry and that kind of valuable, but also other valuables, scarabs, shells, all sorts of things. So it doesn't seem like they were, scraped from the most vulnerable part of society. That, of course, could have still been the case sometimes. But again, looking at the story and saying, okay, what do we know for sure? What do we not know for sure? What are their possibilities? And then holding all of them in our mind is a lot of work. It's more work than just saying, okay, yeah, sex worker, moving on. But looking at all these possibilities. Maybe she's an innkeeper. Maybe she's just lives in a cave for some reason. Maybe she does run her own brothel, right? Because it's plural. Nunim is plural, and it says a woman of Nunim. So maybe she's in charge of taking care of other sex workers. There's a lot of options. But that would go under our first bullet point. What is Nunim? Am I sure I know? I have the right image in mind when I think about a prostitute. Or whatever word your translation uses.
Well, worth the time. I feel like it's just even with 5 or 10 minutes of this exercise, I'm more prepared to step into a study than I was when I was just coming with a bunch of assumptions, ready to dive into the text of Hosea chapter 1. And I love this because I've always even entertained. It would be in the similar column. Well, I don't know what column. Maybe it's another column we're still going to talk about still. But I always assumed Hosea is told to go marry this person, whether he wants to or not. And I've always reframed, we're not necessarily, what if he fell in love with this woman, whether she was a prostitute or not a prostitute, and then he gets into this relationship and then it becomes he feels like it becomes a part of his prophetic calling and the way to frame his prophetic message.
Yeah.
There's just so many other ways to see this where he was an active, not just this robot following orders, like God said, go marry a prostitute and name your kids these things. But what if he was dynamically in this relationship?
Yeah.
Like so many of us have found ourselves in chapters of our lives in similar situations. And Interesting.
Yeah, I'll note God doesn't have to tell him, like, if she is a prostitute, he doesn't have to give
Sure.
him MapQuest directions to get to the brothel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, cool, God.
Where? Who?
Yeah. They do what there? Oh, man. Okay, one last, we're going to jump into the text in just a second, but one last thought about our assumptions coming in. If we're still writing our bullet points in our third column, maybe when we're thinking about, okay, what is the story of Isaiah? The next bullet point might be about, well, she's unfaithful to her husband, right? That's actually jumping forward in the story. And maybe, first off, we don't actually know if they're even married. We'll see that in the text that I'm about to read. There's plenty of good reason to suggest that they are, but again, maybe not. If we look at Hosea 3, which is the story that the book and the film and the Christian midrash about Gomer really comes to fruition, that's because God says that he's going to go find a woman who is committing adultery, but it actually doesn't use her name in it doesn't say Gomer explicitly in chapter 3. So it's always possible when he says, again, walk, love a woman. Again, walk, love a woman loved by, and then it's either the word for neighbor or it's the word for evil, depending on how you vowelate it. So a woman loved by a neighbor or a woman loved by evil and commits adultery. So there's nothing there that suggests that it's Gomer. It could be, but that could also be our bias towards monogamy, which isn't always the case in the text. And also that, pernicious idea that women are to be held in this suspicious, dangerous, grasp, and that you always have to keep on the lookout. So we can put that in our pocket too. More question marks, right? If we end with perfect answers for everything, we can also be aware that we might have taken some missteps, right? There should be things at the end of your time in any text where you still have a big shrug emoji. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Who knows? And that's okay. And that doesn't mean we failed.
Yep.
Back to chapter 1. We look at what happens immediately. She has some kids with real bummers of names. Why is that? What's going on here? Lame mission from God, especially if, as you pointed out, Marty, Hosea doesn't have any agency here. So, Brent, if you wouldn't mind, I'm happy to read my own translation here for Hosea chapter 1, verses 2-4, and then I'll have you read the next passage that's going to come right after it.
I mean, yeah, the EGFV read by the author.
Oh, boy. Okay, here we are. Hosea verse 2 says this. In the beginning, very interesting, Yahweh spoke to Hosea. Yahweh said to Hosea, walk, take to yourself a woman of Znunim. I'm leaving that one. I'm leaving it untranslated because we don't know. Have children of the Znunim, for the land Znuna after Yahweh. Now, that might cause us to say, that seems like prostitution to me. And it totally could be. You're right. It does fit really well. It could still be that the land is being like a great inn, and just allowing all sorts of people to come and stay there and isn't practicing the greatest hospitality, right? There could be other imagery there. And then it says after Yahweh, which is very interesting because it doesn't say reviling Yahweh, but nevertheless, yeah, back into the text. He walked, he being Hosea. He took Gomer, which means complete, daughter of Diblaim, which means fig cakes. She became pregnant. She birthed a son for him. Yahweh said to him, call his name Yisrael, for again, in a little, I will visit the blood of Yisrael upon the house of Yehu, and I will make the kingdom of the house of Yisrael be still. So that Yisrael, that almost sounds like Yisrael, is usually anglicized Jezreel.
Oh, sure.
Which you do have to say it that way.
Right.
And then Yehu, of course, is Jehu. Any observations from the text right off the top?
Oh, either no or a million, one of the two. Like I have two gears here. I either have a million questions or I have none. But yeah, sure.
Give me two from the million.
And maybe not even questions yet. They're formulated. They're observations like Gomer, her name being complete. Like, here's the shot for the story to make, for the narrator. I mean, we know that Hebrew narrators have no problem like using names to give us insight into.
Right.
And yet there's really not what a chance to throw a bunch of shade and make it really clear about who she is. And yet the name being complete, daughter of fig cakes. Gotta love that, which not all names have to mean something. Could just be who she's literally a daughter of. But that's what I'm toying with, that same concept of Yitzer and Yisra and how those sound the same, this phonetic play.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
So we've got these weird names, right? Like you said, we have Yisrael, which obviously sounds like Yisrael. Like the S is exchanged for a Z sound. There's an ayin there instead of an aleph. And then we've got Yehu. Then we have two more kids. They've got sad names, but a little bit more straightforward than Yisrael or Jezreel. And so that might perk up our ears and cause us to ask, wait. What's Jezreel? Is that a place? Is that a person? Who's Yehu? Why would God need to visit the blood of Jezreel? What does that mean? And why upon the house of Yehu? What has Yehu done? What has Jehu been up to that needs revisiting from God? That should cause us to ask some questions, which takes us to column 4, which is entitled, What's the Biblical or Historical Context? What are they talking about?
Okay. Yep. Sure. Didn't even think about this, but this is a great question.
Oh, come on. You didn't think about the biblical historical context on the Behemah podcast?
I'm jumping ahead to this connection with Jehu and going, I didn't think about that context. I've been thinking about, big conceptual, abstract, historical setting context, but she's going into the text and actually pulling things out of the biblical text. And I'm like, oh gosh, look at that.
Aha.
Here we are.
Very good.
Well, I am going to invite you, Brent, to read this introduction to Yehu, or Jehu. You can call him the wrong name. That's fine. And it's from 2 Kings 9, verses 1 through 13. This is the Lexham English Bible, but feel free to read at home, whatever you have.
Now Elisha the prophet called for one of the sons of the prophets, and he said to him, Gird your loins, and take this flask of olive oil in your hand, and go to Ramoth Gilead. Go there and look there for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi. Go, for you must cause him to arise from among his brothers, and you must bring him into an inner room. You must take the flask of olive oil and pour it out on his head. You must say, Thus says Yahweh, I hereby anoint you as king over Israel. Then you must open the door and flee. Do not linger. A lot of you musts in there.
Mm-hmm. Disciple. You've got to give them firm instruction.
Good, I like it. So the young man, servant of the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. He came and looked. The commanders of the army were sitting there. He said, I have a word for you, O commander. Jehu said, For whom? For all of us? And he said, For you, O commander. He got up and went to the house and poured the olive oil on his head and said to him, Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, I hereby anoint you as king over the people of Yahweh, over Israel. You will destroy the house of Ahab, your master, and you will avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all of the servants of Yahweh from the hand of Jezebel. All of the house of Ahab will perish, and I shall cut off all males from Ahab, both bond and free. I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah. The dogs will eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and there shall not be anyone to bury her. Then he opened the door and fled. Then Jehu came out to the officers of his master, and they said to him, Peace? Why did this madman come to you? And he said to them, You know the man and his foolish talk. Then they said, Liar, please tell us. He said, Thus and so he said to me, saying, Thus says Yahweh, I hereby anoint you as king over Israel. So they hastened each one to take his cloak, and they spread them under him on the bare steps, blew on the trumpet, and said, Jehu is king.
Ah, thank you, Brent. What immediately pops out to us about this passage?
I mean, so many things, but there's definitely a lot of blood talk. So I feel like we're making a connection there.
From whom?
The blood of the servants.
Yes. Who is the one pronouncing this blood prophecy?
Elisha?
Nope.
Well, I mean, I guess the Lord.
Nope.
Okay.
One of the sons of the prophets.
If we look carefully, Elisha says, this is verse 3.
Yep.
Take the flask, say, this is what Yahweh says. I anoint you as king over Israel. Then you must open the door and flee. Do not linger.
Yep.
This guy does flee, but he also lingered. And he adds all of verses 6 through 10 that were not what God actually told him to say through Elisha. He throws on all of this decor.
Yep.
God says, I'm going to make you king. Is there already a king? Yes, there is. But it reminds us of another story in Tanakh, right? Where God made somebody king when there already was a king, right? David and Shaul. But in that story, David waits and waits and waits, and he refuses to use deceit and trickery, and he's bound to his uprightness, his integrity, and God honors him and loves that. And in time, he becomes king, and he refuses to dishonor Shaul, right? He won't even kill him while he's going to the bathroom, and he cuts his robe and repents and feels terrible about the whole thing. Jehu, after this passage comes to an end, what he does now that he has his friends, which, by the way, I love the human element of that conversation. Sounds so real. What did that crazy person say? Oh, don't pay attention to him. Okay, so what does Jehu go on to do? Well, he sneaks into Jezreel, ding, 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 from Hosea, and he shoots the king of the northern kingdom in the heart, and he dies. He's not satisfied with that. He then goes and mortally wounds the king of Judah, who has to crawl off to Megiddo, and he also dies. Then he gets the eunuchs to dump Jezebel out the window, and she indeed is eaten by dogs. He kills the 70 sons of Ahab, and he mounds their heads outside the gates of Jezreel, which, by the way, if you even look, the son of the prophet, right, the disciple of Elisha, didn't even tell him to do that. He said that God was going to. He said, you will do this and this and this, which was already made up. But then at least he said, God is going to cut off all of the males from the house of Ahab. But no, Jehu also takes that upon himself, mounds up 70 heads outside of the gates, again in Jezreel. He tricks and kills 42 relatives of the king of the north. Yes, one of the kings, Azariah, and he dumps them in the pit. And then he also tricks and kills all of the Baal worshipers. So that's a lot of violence. And when we read without paying close attention, we say, another one of those crazy stories that makes me uncomfortable. God telling people to go and kill a whole bunch of people randomly. And we have to dial in and lean in instead of leaning out and being like, oh, I don't know about that. Lean in, because then we can see God never said any of that. The prophet, this disciple, went off the rails, and then Jehu went off the rails even further. So therefore, if God's saying in the book of Hosea that he is going to revisit the blood that was spilled in Jezreel, and he's going to visit it upon the house of Jehu, that makes it seem to me that this story isn't about sexual ethics at all, but rather how God feels about rampant violence. Because so many of us in our culture, especially, it's easy to say, well, Jezebel was bad, so it's fine. And the Baal worshipers, they weren't following God, and maybe their worship was, off the rails as well. And so people get what they deserve, and Jehu is doing the right thing. But to God, apparently, because we have this whole book telling us so, this whole prophecy, our rightness in somebody else's injustice doesn't mean that we get to go and do whatever we want about it. We don't get to go and yell at people on the internet. We don't get to go and be violent just because we know we're right and the other person has done something wrong. And that, therefore, seems to me anyway, is what God's reacting against when we get to the later portions of Hosea and Hosea chapter 2.
Dang, that's great. That's really good insight. I'd never even caught that. So good. So good. And that obscure line, right? That line that you would just read over like, oh, here's the prophet being poetic. Visit the blood of Jezreel in the house of Jehu. You know, like you do. And
That's
never
actually my
stopping
weekend
long
plans.
enough. Yeah, without ever pausing to go, wait a minute. Okay, who was Jehu? Is Jezreel a reference to that? Goodness, sure. Absolutely. Because it could be that we end up condemning like the exact opposite thing. Like we're here condemning. We use Hosea to condemn a whole group of sinful ideas when Jehu is actually trying to condemn something, or not Jehu, Hosea is trying to condemn something totally different. Love it.
Perhaps a cautionary tale about being too concerned about reading the names correctly and not paying attention to the other details of the passage.
Zing!
There you go. Doesn't matter.
It's my toxic trait.
It's okay. We all get one of those. Just one.
Thank you.
So that's yours.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, I've got some empty columns here.
We got some empty columns. So this brings us nicely along, transitions easily to column number 5 about our harms to avoid. Why is this even important? You might think like, well, I'm just going to tell people the truth. And no matter what they choose to do with the truth, that's their own business, not mine. Perhaps in the life and teachings and ministry of Jesus, he introduced us to this concept about how to tell good teachers from false teachers. Jesus introduces us to this idea about good fruit and bad fruit. And he teaches us that you can't get good fruit from the poison tree and you can't get poison fruit from a good tree. And that's about people, right? I don't want to obfuscate too much the difference between what Jesus is saying and what I'm saying, because there is a little gap there. Jesus is saying if the fruit of someone's life, of the teacher's life is poison, then that means that they are a false teacher and you should not be following them, presumably. Jesus says, Matthew 7, we can go check it. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. So therefore, when we're applying our discernment and we're thinking about teachings and we're thinking about teachers, this is in the same section that he's talking about, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ferocious wolves. It may behoove us to ask ourselves, is whatever teaching that I've been marinating on, whether I'm sharing it with everybody or just keeping it to myself in my own private study, what is a possible fruit of this approach that I am leaning into, that I'm studying, that I'm figuring out, wrestling with, piecing together? Because if, especially churches and institutions, end up not thinking about this and teaching and allowing theologies which empower people to go do evil things, whether that's shootings at synagogues because of a lack of good teaching about anti-Semitism and Christian history and Christian theology, then we failed, right? If we're giving a teaching to the world which empowers domestic violence or can be weaponized in some way, right? There's a ton of examples, and domestic violence is about to be important in this particular section. Then we are sharing responsibility, in my opinion, for the guilt of that violence, which is continuing to tear the world apart rather than put it back together. This is all about to come together, because if we look in Hosea chapter 2, after we've had this quirky, eccentric passage where we go, oh, weird, go and find a sex worker and have kids with her. Okay. In chapter 2 of Hosea, God has quite the diatribe that he unleashes before he returns to redemption and grace and kindness and nurturing. And in the first half of chapter 2, it says that God is going to respond to what has been done. And he says that he is going to strip Israel naked, make her like a wilderness, kill her with thirst, isolate her, take away her food and her drink and her clothing, and humiliate her utterly, which is uncomfortable. If we ignore the context that we just sought out and we make the story, we change the story to be about unfaithful women. And what do we do when there's infidelity and adultery? We are accidentally, for anybody who goes on and reads the next chapter, writing a permission slip for domestic abuse. Because if this is what God does and the story is about sexual ethics and marriage, then certainly that's what men get to do, right? That's what people who have been cheated on get to do.
And even if we don't commit that, like even if we don't close that logic loop,
right?
I'm even the way that I just assume, like my brain, my Bible college trained brain will do this abstract thing where it's like, well, when you have spiritual infidelity and you're unfaithful to God, this is what happens. Like your life just falls apart.
Right.
And what that does, even when you don't close the logic loop it still sets the stage, because if that's who God is, if that's how God operates, if that's the overriding principle, theological, spiritual principle of how faithfulness and spiritual infidelity and failing and sin and rebellion, if that's how it works, then you still end up eventually back at that same spot where you were, which is that, well, we have a violent theology because we ultimately believe in a violent God. And so that will embody itself in a violent followership.
Yes, you don't have to do the algebra there of A plus B equals C in order for the sneaky darkness to weasel its way through our psyche and end up just in a place of instability and fear. Okay, so if that's not what the story is about, then what is it about, and how is God reacting? What is happening then in Hosea 2? If the story is about violence, if it's about Jehu going off and being like, oh, I'm right, this person said that I get to do all these things, so now I'm going to go do all these things, haha, even when God didn't say that. If the story is about violence and God's people committing violence in the name of God, then that means the unfaithfulness God is talking about in this section of Hosea isn't sexual unfaithfulness. It's about violence. It's about, I told you that you were a king. And instead you went and did all of these things. And yes, that prophet shouldn't have said this, but still you yet perpetrated all of these deeply traumatic, horrible things. 70 relatives, their heads needed to be piled up outside the gate. Really? You thought that was me? Really? When we do violence in the name of God, Hosea 2 then is about God revisiting that violence back upon us.
Violence begetting more violence. This cycle, whoever lives by the sword dies by the sword, words of Jesus, that whole principle. Sure, absolutely.
Exactly. It finds its way, just like resurrection finds its way in miraculous, surprising, unexpected ways. New life happens. When you are perpetrating death and violence and darkness, God will, in some surprising, unexpected, tell it slant way, seemingly bring it back to you, which makes then the gospel, the good news, the great hope of the second half of Hosea 2 so much more beautiful, both for people who have survived violence and people who have perpetrated violence in some way. It doesn't have to be just physical violence, and yet who have gone through the process of repentance and reconciliation fully. Which brings us to our sixth column, right? And sometimes it's really easy to forget this column if you're uber intellectual and you love just like staying in context world forever and looking up historical, cultural things. We miss out on the most life-giving part if we forget column 6, which is entitled, What is the Good News in this portion that I'm looking at? What is life-giving? So if we skip that, there's all this nourishment, there's good nutrients in the scripture that's just waiting to minister to our souls. And if we just hang out in column 5 all the time, and then we go on a loop back to column 1 and say, oh, see, there are the harms that I just discovered, right? When they were creeping into the way I was taught this. We never get to column 6. We're missing out on beautiful, good things. So column 6, what is the good news in this passage? What is the life-giving about this passage? And I would submit, at least for this first chunk of Hosea, that Hosea 2, verses 14 through 23, which is one of my favorites to memorize and bring back. Marty actually started me on memorizing a chunk of it way back in undergrad. So many years ago. It's beautiful. So I would love, Brent, if you could read those verses for us.
Therefore I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards, and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came up out of Egypt. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. I will remove the names of the Baals from her lips. No longer will their names be invoked. In that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds in the sky, and the creatures that move along the ground. Bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. In that day I will respond, declares the Lord. I will respond to the skies, and they will respond to the earth. And the earth will respond to the grain, the new wine, and the olive oil, and they will respond to Jezreel. I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people. And they will say, you are my God.
So I love, if I'm hearing you correctly, God essentially doubles down on his commitment to a nonviolent way.
Right.
Violence begets violence. This is what's happening. This is what I'm unhappy with. But I will, by the time this process is over, take you back and teach you the way of nonviolence again. I will speak tenderly to you. I will teach you the way of love.
Right.
I will remind you. It will be a place of safety. Like I kept hearing this because you had made these very practical applications in so many levels to like people who would experience domestic abuse now today. Like I'm hearing it through the lens of somebody who's experienced violence.
Right.
Hearing somebody say, this will be a safe place. I'll restore a sense of shalom and peace and wholeness that has been damaged by so much violence. Completely changes what we're hearing in this story. 100%.
Right. Even that section where it says, you will call me my husband, you will no longer call me my master. The word Baal just means master. And it's used in modern Israel. It's used for husband. If you're saying, oh, who's with you? Right. I would say, Baali, my husband. And so he's even removing, along with the safety, along with taking actual weaponry away, he's also removing the hierarchy, the schemas that holds the things that breed oppression in place.
Yeah, well, the things I'm still unpacking, I'm going to be for a while after we hang up this episode. I'm just the poignancy of the point that when we don't read the Bible well, it has, even when we would never say like, oh, I'm never going to preach this in a way that would like condone domestic violence.
Right.
I would never do that in a way that actually, if we're not careful, we frame our theology in ways that continue to make a cultivated theological bed for that stuff to grow.
Right.
And we don't necessarily do the appropriate work to weed all that stuff out. And I'm appropriately convicted of that. That's a really fantastic little journey. Thanks for messing me up for the day. That's good.
Yeah. Which even, so the statistics say 1 in 4 women has experienced violence at the hand of somebody. And even if you say, oh, those are overblown in some way, go to 1 in 8. That means if you have a church of, 100 people, that's still a lot of folks who have experienced violence. And most likely, because most violence isn't from random strangers hiding in alleyways, but rather partners and spouses. And anyway, they're also in your church, not to you specifically. Yeah. They're everywhere. Yeah. They're all around us. And we can't just imagine oh, of course not my community.
Yep. And I love how you didn't just make that point based on reason. You showed us, like, in the text why there are deliberate mentions that are there that we typically read over and choose to focus on the other details that fit our assumptions and our biases. So fantastic little tool. I love it.
Well, wonderful. And that template, as we said, thanks, Brent. Thanks for your future work. We'll be there.
Oh, my pleasure.
He's coming around.
Elle, you have, we've got this link for the mass grave in the Negev. That'll be a fun read, I guess. What other resources can we give to people as we walk out the door?
Read. There's a lot of photos, not of the skeletons, but a lot of fun photos. I just have thrown a couple good reads in there. Oxford Handbook on Hosea is going to be a bunch of essays from scholars and different perspectives, different things they're bringing to the table, which is great. You can read the rest of them. Again, this is if you want to do a deep dive on, oh man, I've only ever heard this one way before, and it's always been XYZ, and maybe you want to open yourself up to different ways that people have applied different lenses to the text and turned it upside down and on its head. So those are there for your own perusal.
I can see Texts of Terror from Phyllis Tribble. That was one of the references for my grad work this last week in class.
A classic.
Yep.
A classic.
Yep.
The Phyllises go hard.
Phyllis Tribble and Phyllis Bird. Absolutely.
Yes. The scholarship from the last century is really took off. You think there's just a few names out there who write things from women's perspective. Wrong. There's a ton of them, and they're amazing.
Yeah.
Go find them.
Awesome. Good links there.
I'm just imagining Phyllis from The Office, so probably not.
You can. They have Wikipedia pages, so you can go check them out.
Okay. All right. Well, all of those links will be in the show notes. You can find those at bamondiscipleship.com or in your podcast app. You can use the website to get in touch with us. The contact page always has the most up-to-date way to do so, whatever that may be, whenever you may happen to be listening to this episode. You can also find ways to support the work that we do. Everything that we do is made possible by listeners like you. So thank you for that. And thanks for joining us on the Bama Podcast this week. We'll talk to you again soon.